Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio. Oh my God, have we got a great show in store today. So we've got someone that you would very much assume is a very angry person because of their sort of brand image online, being called angry something. I won't let the cat out of the bag yet. There's loads of things that is going to come up in the show today, and this man is passionate about. And let me read some of these things that this man really likes to talk about, because I think already it's going to get you intrigued into today's show. So people making unscientific claims about health benefits of diets, recipes, ingredients, that kind of stuff. Food manufacturers making false claims about their products. Food manufacturers and retailers that disregard the importance of keeping the nation healthy. Chefs, bloggers, food writers with ridiculously inflated senses of their own self-importance, restaurants that are out of touch with reality, the misinformation that's in the food world, journalists and media outlets that publish incorrect or poorly researched articles about nutrition. We know that there's an awful lot that goes on in the food world, nutrition world. There's all sorts of claims that are debated in the scientific literature, and the media misinterpret it. And essentially, this man is extremely passionate about trying to break down a lot of this stuff. He's written books on it. He's been in the media an awful lot. He's an absolute hero. Welcome to the show, the Angry Chef, aka Anthony Warner. Hello.
Hello. Good to be here.
Was that a apt description of all the things that you have to regularly get off your chest?
Yeah, I think so. It's probably not completely everything, because I'm sure there's many other things, but I can't think of them at the moment. But that's a pretty good summary. I'm a chef, so my life has been cooking, and my life has been helping people to enjoy food and to have a good relationship with food. And I just get upset when things are misrepresented, and when people are misled and people are made to feel guilty about eating stuff, because that just seems, we have such quite a complex relationship with food these days, and people are made to feel guilty about what they eat, and that just seems a ridiculous thing to do, and it just puts people down to, pushes people into quite an uncomfortable and difficult and problematic relationship with food. So I just try and cut through a lot of that, and there's so much of it. It comes from so many directions. There's a lot of stamping down to do.
So we have talked about this stuff loads on the podcast before, because, like you, we're very passionate coaches. We want people to get the right kind of information. Now, Obviously, this soup that you like to delve into has been coming to a simmer for a while, all these different things that you like to talk about. Was there a particular turning point where you're like, I'm going to have to speak out more about this stuff? This thing's just pushed me over the edge. And then because I know you started your blog in around 2016?
Yeah, it would have been sort of probably around then, around the end of 2015. I was listening to someone, one of the sort of clean eating diet people, talking about food and at a big industry conference. And I just, I'd gone along to see what she had to say, and I just realised after a few minutes she didn't know what she was talking about. I have a degree in biochemistry. I have many years' experience working in food, working with nutritionists, working with dietitians, so I have a reasonable knowledge. But I just realised she didn't know what she was talking about, and she was saying a lot of stuff which was false information. A lot of stuff actually seemed quite damaging, that could put people into a really difficult, complex relationship with food and make them feel very guilty about eating it. And I just felt these people have enormous power online, that they have enormous followings, and someone needs to be saying something, because they seem to have a lot of influence in the world of food. It was really growing, and no one was really saying anything, and they were all publishing books, and they were getting TV deals, and I just thought, no, there's a real problem here, and someone needs to kind of stamp down on it. And so I sort of created this character online, and it became quite popular quite quickly. I think people had, a lot of people were feeling the same. A lot of people were kind of like upset that they were being made to feel guilty about food unnecessarily, and that there were people spreading, completely unscientific or pseudoscientific messages about food.
I couldn't agree more. So why do you think it happened? So let's say this individual that you went and watched is sitting on stage, and she's saying all this stuff. Do you think that person's actually engaging in the literature? Do you think it's all come from personal experience? So this person's gone on a diet, they've seen amazing results? Because I'll be honest, I thought the paleo diet, when I was the age of 19, so this is 13 years ago now, I thought the paleo diet was incredible because it's the diet that I followed to go from obese to healthy. So I had a huge personal bias towards it. And over time, I learned by investing time in, literature and science that actually there's reasons and mechanisms behind that, and it's not necessarily the things that are promoted. Do you think there's an awful lot of personal bias, and as a result, the personal power, those things combined we end up getting a lot of incorrect food blogger type messages?
Yeah, I mean, there's a problem of personal bias. There's many reasons why someone, I always look at these. A lot of the bloggers had this identical sort of template that they have, which is they had some illness, and then they found some sort of dietary cure for that illness, and they got better, and now they're sort of spreading the message about that to the world. And that's, there's many reasons why that's the case, but we are sort of storytelling creatures. So if you're ill or you've got something you're unhappy with, and you do something, you make some intervention, and then you see a change, you always associate that change with the intervention that you've made, because we like to tell a story. Whereas, as people well know, it's not that simple usually. There's various reasons why you might be improving, but might not have anything to do with the magical properties of food. But then a lot of these people are looking at research, and they're looking at information out there. But the problem with nutrition science, and I think that you really realise that the more and more you study it, there's an awful lot of uncertainty in nutrition science. There's a lot of conflicting information out there, and there's a lot of if you want to find some sort of information to confirm your biases, then you will find an individual paper which will do that. But actually the totality of the evidence is probably sort of against those sort of dramatic single exclusion interventions, or things like that, or against like the things like the paleo diet. But you might find stuff within the literature which will confirm what you want to believe, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the whole truth and the complete picture. And I'm not sort of systematically reviewing evidence, because I don't have the qualifications to do that. It takes a lot of insight and work and ability to be able to do that. So you really need to be very, very careful to not sort of cherry picking things to confirm your existing biases, and that's what almost everybody I argue with is doing. They're not looking at the totality of evidence, and they're just sort of cherry picking individual things, and that creates this problematic thing where people are spreading in vastly sort of contrasting bits of information. Someone saying one thing's good, someone saying another thing's good, and people just get confused. You really should be not looking to believe too much into personalities, because we're all different, and there's an enormous complexity to these things.
So the popularity of your work, as it started to sort of grow and people were kind of watching these debates that you were having, is it because that a lot of people were like, oh, okay, this is interesting, here's an opposing view, here's someone looking at it objectively, and they were open-minded to the alternative view? Or is it a case that you were getting an awful lot of people that were almost bystanding these debates and going, oh, popcorn at the ready, here we go, the angry chef's at it again? Because I'm wondering how open people actually are to these opposing opinions.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people. I got a lot of engagement initially from the nutrition science and dietetics community, because I was often saying the things that they wanted to say and the things that were frustrating to them, and actually a lot of early following from the fitness industry, because they were getting really frustrated with the misinformation out there about nutrition, and about people just being so sort of selling certainty, because certainty about these things sells. And a lot of them were people who were very informed and very knowledgeable, but liked the way I was confronting and arguing with people, and wanted to watch that, and wanted to watch sort of how some of these sort of diet gurus reacted to having their stuff challenged, because it just wasn't being challenged by anyone. But then also there's a considerable following who came along and had difficult and troubled relationships with food, and were getting into sort of problems because they were being made to feel guilty about almost every single food that they eat, and and it was just seeing what I was doing was kind of giving them a place where they could go and go, actually, I shouldn't be listening to these people. I should be relaxing more about what I eat. I should be enjoying food for what it is, and and getting back to that place and stripping away all the guilt and shame that seems to have developed around it, and getting back to the point where food is actually a joy and a pleasure and a thing that brings us together, rather than sort of this obsession we have with individualizing our diets and everyone eating specifically for them, rather than food as sharing and doing all the wonderful things that food actually can do. So I think it really, I think there's two things, like you said. It's partly people coming along to watch me arguing with people, because I generally argue from quite an informed place and are quite good at it. But also people wanting to get to a place where they had a less guilt-ridden relationship with food, and that's probably the most important people I really wanted to reach.
There is an awful lot of food anxiety out there. It's a big problem, and I think Instagram has played a huge role in not leading it in a positive direction. So one of the things I picked up through your work is that you want people to lead a better life where they are happier and healthier. But first, the first thing we need to do is fight for a fairer world. What does this mean for you? Where does that kind of comment come from?
I think what you learn when you're looking at sort of health inequalities and public health and those sort of issues is the biggest determinants of what someone's health is going to be is their socioeconomic status. That's the biggest in a country like ours. If you're in a deprived community, you are far more likely to die and you're far more likely to develop all sorts of diseases. You'll have far fewer years of healthy life than someone who lives in a more affluent community, and that's the most important determinant of health. And too often we are sort of thinking that if we take some of the markers of privilege that we have, like our freedom to eat sort of nice sort of farm produce and organic foods, and we sprinkle them onto people's lives who are living harder lives, then they'll magically become healthier. But it's not necessarily the diet that's making people unhealthy. It's not necessarily a lifestyle choice. It's the social inequality that is driving that health inequality. And I just think, if we really want to improve people's health, that's the thing we really need to be looking at, and that's the thing we need to address. But unfortunately, those are really hard and expensive and difficult things to address. So we're kind of drawn to trying to impose lifestyle changes on people rather than actually improving their circumstances. So I think there are enormous health inequalities in this country and in most countries worldwide, but they're the result of socioeconomic inequalities. That is not that's actually, it's a direct symptom of living a deprived and stigmatized life. So I'm very much of the view that we need to try and persuade people that's where the real problems are, and we only ever really change things when we actually make life better for everybody. But that's a really difficult thing to do, so we're kind of drawn to this sort of make everyone go on a low carb diet or whatever like that. We think those things are the important things, because they don't require us to give up a lot of our privilege. So that's it's not always the most popular view to hold, because people are drawn to these sort of want simple solutions to complex problems, but there aren't. What we really need is to just kind of make it a better, fairer world if we're really worried about health inequalities.
So how do you navigate this as a chef? Because one of the things I've always prided myself on in my work, and this was as a result of my early years, and I'll be frank and say I led a real normal middle class life, just brought up in a normal salary environment. Food was fine. It was relatively balanced and healthy. And when I became more successful in my career when I was younger, and I was into fitness, I was starting to post recipes like salmon on various things and bloody expensive greens and all the rest of it. And when you look at it, that was probably like a £7-8 meal, which is fine when you're young and you're doing all right and you're into fitness and stuff. But when there's people that have got families and they don't want to go and buy 100 grams worth of salmon for £6 and stuff, do you think us and the fitness industry, if we genuinely want to help, there's a massive cost component to this healthy living thing? Because people are not going to go and spend £6 on 100 grams of salmon because some fitness blogger said it was healthy.
Yeah, no, it's very difficult. I'm a chef. I like nice food. I like people to try nice things, and some nice foods are expensive and inaccessible. So really, it's it's a case of understanding that you can eat healthily on a low budget, but we need to find ways of helping people to do that, and also understand that the biggest drivers of health inequalities are actually the sort of the conditions in which people are living their lives and the pressures they're under. And it's not just about the fact that they can't afford an expensive ingredient. It's the fact that lives are actually really, really difficult and hard. But as a chef, I want to encourage people to make better choices. I want to encourage people to have more access to good quality food, and we sort of should be campaigning for that in sensible ways that actually make sense. For instance, if you look at things like business rates now, if you want to open a takeaway, then the business rates are exactly the same as if you want to open a shop selling fruit and vegetables. So perhaps if we change the way that the rates are structured, would encourage better options for people, would encourage lower prices for those sort of things, and encourage better food environments. But what we just need to stop trying to sort of force change upon people, and actually make change happen from the bottom up, and sort of reach people who are leading difficult lives, but also give them lives where making healthy options and better options make sense, because that's kind of where the real change will happen.
So when we talk about change in our food ecosystem, because there's a massive conversation at the moment around whether our current food environment, let's just say the UK, whether it's sustainable or not for the future. The vegan diet is a massive talking point at the moment. There's multiple components to this. We've got an ethical component, sustainability component, we've got a health component, we've got a lifestyle component. And I don't really want to go down the ethical route. I don't feel it's relevant to this conversation. What I'm keen on is there's a socio-economic environment that you've just talked about, and then there's a sustainability environment. With the way that we talk about food right now and the balance that we try and get people to, is it sustainable? Should people be looking at their meat and dairy consumption? Is that something that is going to become a stressful conversation if we project to 3, 5, 7 years' time?
Yeah, I think if you look at the diet that we eat in this country, and certainly if you look at the diet that people eat in the US or in many other countries with high consumption of ruminant animals, especially sheep, goats, and cows, they have a really disproportionately high impact on climate change. And if we don't make dramatic changes to the agricultural system and the way we eat now and the way we produce food, then we're heading for an enormous problem. You look at many reports from the sort of most prominent environmental scientists in the world, and they will tell you that it is a huge problem. And it actually by 2050, if every other sector manages to reduce climate change emissions or greenhouse gas emissions to zero, agriculture will still be raising the temperature, world temperature by 2 degrees, and sort of which you can see from the sort of Paris climate change agreements. So and that will have a devastating impact on so many things, and it's a serious problem, the biggest problem in food right now by a mile. But that does, but what are you going to do about that? And for me, it's not realistic or sensible to say to everybody, everyone's got to go vegan. Veganism is a solution to this, because it's genuinely not. There are different types of land where actually cattle or sheep are the best way to get food off that land. And in terms of land use, you can't use every bit of grazing pasture for to grow crops on instead. It's just unrealistic to say we shouldn't eat any meat, because that's just not going to happen. You can't force behaviour change on people, but we need to have serious conversations about how we're going to make that sort of behaviour change happen, and how we're going to change our diets, and how we're going to use technology to improve the efficiency of agriculture. And there's a lot of sensible work being done, but I feel that the debate is becoming hijacked by, as every debate these days seems to, by extremists on either side. So you have sort of a lot of vegan campaigners. No problem with veganism at all. It's absolutely fine choice for a lot of people, but there are an extreme group of vegan campaigners on one side, and there's an extreme group of sort of high meat consuming individuals on the other side. And there's also, a meat industry and dairy industry influencing that argument on that side as well. And the sensible middle, where the real work is going to happen, where the real innovation and change and thoughtful work into behaviour change is going to happen in the middle. But the debate's being dominated by extremes now, and extremes are no good. If you say to someone, you must go vegan because that's the only thing you can do, for many people that's just not a change that they're willing to make, or not a change that makes sense in their lives, and not a change that's possible for them. And you have something which is a well-known phenomenon, which is something called learned helplessness, where if the change you want people to make is so extreme that it's impossible for them, they will just disconnect from the need to change. So I think if we're telling people everyone should go vegan, that's something that's going to, not necessarily the best option anyway, but it's also just going to disconnect people from the need to change. So we need to do more thoughtful work about how we're going to properly shift people's behaviours in a way that's going to create a more sensible diet. And that's really hard, but all we seem to have at the moment is people saying the way you're eating is wrong, it needs to change, and we're going to tax meat to some extreme so people won't be able to afford it, which I just don't think is helpful. It's a massive problem, but not enough thoughtful work's being done on how to really make people change their behaviour in a sensible way.
So I'd love to get your thoughts on my thought pattern around this at the moment, because I've just been through Veganuary and I did it as a personal experiment to say, look, what's happening in the vegan space? How do I feel on a completely vegan diet? Because it's been a long time since I followed one. I have a good handful of vegan clients, so I was like, look, do I really understand this? So I just went all in and did it. And that exposed me to a lot of the sustainability arguments and a lot of the conversations in general around our food system. And I kind of reached this point where I was like, I personally don't want to give up eating meat, and I felt unhealthier being vegan. So I feel that needs to be part of my diet. But when I get into the sustainability argument, there's certain parts of the food system that seem really overburdening. You brought up ruminant animals like cows seem to, in the way that a lot of it's being farmed, really put a lot of pressure. So if, as a kind of, let's just say the UK for now, if we wasted less food, if we ate less calories, if we maybe reduced our meat consumption by 50%, hypothetical figure, and we started to focus that 50% on food production that puts less stress on the ecosystem, climate change, so dairy production, chicken, turkey, that kind of stuff, would we be starting to get some way closer that's doable for a lot of people and healthy and kind of just from a lifestyle perspective?
Yeah, I mean those sound like really sensible changes that perhaps would be achievable, and that's sort of where I would sit about what actually we need to do. Reduce the amount of meat we're eating. I think we need to sort of think about technologies that are coming along that maybe give people options, because you certainly shouldn't ever think about sort of forcing people to eat less through taxation unless there's some sort of alternative they're not compromising on, because otherwise there will be unrest. You look at sort of Paris at the moment, where people been rioting over a few pence on fuel, which is an environmental tax. And imagine if you started taxing beef and dairy products to like double, treble their price, or whatever you need to do to really shift behaviour. Yes, those are really sensible things, but we need to think about how we make that sort of behaviour change happen. And it is possible to have big behaviour changes with food. You look at the way the amount of increase in chicken consumption, move from beef to chicken from sort of the 1960s through to the present day. That's been driven by innovation, and it's been driven by health concerns. It's been driven by sensible options being out there for people to buy, and just wanting to make that shift. And it's been driven by price as well. So there's a lot of those options are really sensible, but there's a lot of work needs to go into how we make those options happen for everybody, because it's no good like 10% of people pledging to make a sensible change. We need most people to change, and that's the really difficult thing we need to think about. And anyone who has influence in the world of food needs to be thinking about what they can do to help make that shift happen sort of wide scale across the whole population.
So if you were to write kind of a blog or a short memoir and say, look, if you were to do like these 5, 6, 7, 8 things when it came to your own diet and your own food choices, and they are both healthy and they have a big impact on the world, how would you start to almost frame the future diet? Because I know that there's a big conversation again in the media about this. They've just brought out, I think it was called the EAT report, the EAT Foundation, and that's a big talking point throughout Europe at the moment. What's kind of your angle? Because I want to get people to think and buy into almost your perspective, because you're someone that's really invested a lot of time into this area.
Okay, so yeah, I mean the future. There will be technological changes which will affect the food supply in the future. Some of those won't have any impact on the consumer. It will just be like, there's potential to make beef and dairy farming better. There's potential to make meat replacement products which are better. There's potential to make things that we can add to meat to make it go further. There's even the potential to grow meat in a laboratory, though that's a long way off. There's lots of things like that will happen. But in terms of what people should do in terms of their own behaviour, it's kind of embedding those sensible changes that need to happen, like the reduction of eating less meat, eating more fruits and vegetables, eating getting more fibre into our diet, eating more whole grains. It's kind of creating those things and putting them into a framework which is not about individual choice. It's about feeding families, and it's about eating together and creating sort of meal occasions because meat is so often such culturally such an important food. It's a centre of family and sharing occasions, and it's creating new, different ways of doing that, which is the important thing about food, and the thing that will make food choice change sort of sustainable is when it becomes embedded into our culture and embedded into a culture of sharing and eating together and enjoyment. And it's really, we should never. The changes will never happen if there are penance to people. If people are giving stuff up, they will happen if there's enjoyment there and there's pleasure in the eating experience, and there are things that people want to do and changes that people want to make, and they're not having to compromise. Once we start having to really sort of compromise in terms of diet and eat something which feels like it's just hard work for the good of the planet, that will never sustainably happen. Not across wide. It might happen for a small percentage of people, but not across wide ways of the population. So we need to find ways to kind of make a better diet sort of better for people and actually suits people and actually makes sense in their lives and makes sense across the lives of most people.
So you've invested an awful lot of time in the knowledge that you have. You're a chef. You have a family. I'm interested, what does your diet look like for yourself and kind of your family, knowing what you know?
No more I know. I mean, I don't talk too much about the specifics of how I eat, because how I eat is kind of how I eat, and it's sort of personal to me and it's personal to my family. But I eat. I try to eat a varied and interesting diet, and I think that's the most important thing you can do. And I try to enjoy food as much as I can, and particularly enjoy sharing food as much as I can with my family and with other people, and eating together and sharing eating experiences. I think the biggest problem we have in diet generally, certainly in the UK and the US, the way that food has gone, the way that diet has gone, the way our ideas about healthy eating has gone, is we've individualised our diet too much. So I try not to do that. I try to eat food that other people have cooked. I try to cook food for different people. I try to cook as many different things as possible and have a relaxed relationship with food, and not ever demonise one particular food, or not ever. I never say that I won't eat anything. There's pretty much nothing that I will not eat. In terms of health, because I don't think to demonise things is absolutely ridiculous, and I also try not to idolise certain ingredients and say this is something that I really think we should eat all the time. So I just try to eat a wide variety of interesting food and enjoy what I eat, because I think that's the most important thing. And I think we've got a long way away from that, and thinking that we have to individualise our diet in order to be healthy.
When we sort of look at these conversations that are happening online, and just coming back to some of the debates that you've had online, when you get a lot of reaction or friction or hit a big brick wall, what kind of camps does it tend to come from? In my experience, when we start to talk about food sustainability and what we eat, there's there's a big fight back, pushback from ethical vegans, and I get that and I respect that, and that's kind of their side. What other kind of camps do you hit this friction mark with, and how can we almost open up the conversation in a more humane way? Because we recently did a big panel debate in London, and one of the things that we raised at the end is like, we've all got views, there's loads of data, we all eat in certain ways. Unless more of us can have more humane conversations with each other and open up sensible debate, nothing's going to change, because arguing on Twitter and calling each other an idiot is just not solving any problem at all.
Yeah. Okay. So the people I wrote in a bit about veganism in the past, and like I said, I'm perfectly supportive of veganism. I felt there was an extreme element for a while, which was causing a lot of damage. So there's a lot of vegans who have engaged with me quite heavily in the past, but that tends to have died off now. The most problem I get is from people who follow low carb diet, high fat diets. That sort of LCHF group. They tend to be quite vociferous and argue very specifically, and are very much against this idea that we need to cut and reduce meat consumption down, even though that's pretty much the considered view of every respectable environmental scientist in the world. They will say, oh yes, but there's a video on YouTube or whatever. And so I have lots of arguments like that, and about the health aspects of low carb fat. And my idea about diet is people should eat whatever they want to do, and I'm quite happy for people to eat that diet, but it's not the one true diet to rule them all, and that's the thing that people are selling, and that's the thing that people argue against. I'm not anti any particular diet. I'm kind of anti all of them, thinking that they're the one diet for everybody. I think argument is good. I think argument can be good. That's how we get places. We shouldn't be sort of saying we can never argue about food, we can never argue about diet, because it's a most important subject. But we do need to have more sensible debates. Like I said, things like the environmental debate are the debate is being dominated by extremists on either side, and we need to have a more moderate discussion. This would help in a lot of politics as well. Do you know what I mean? Where extremists on either side dominating the debate. We should probably be looking in the middle and saying, where is the sensible way forward? Because the behaviour of a small number of activist vegans and a small number of activist sort of low fat, high fat, low carb dieters or carnivores, their behaviours are kind of irrelevant, really, because it's the big group of people in the middle who are going to be the ones where we need to shift and create real change. So we do need to have debate is important, arguments are important, but we also need to get to a more sensible place with discussing these sort of big issues, and stop everything being dominated by a few extremists, especially extremists who are heavily invested in selling a particular diet, because they will always have biases.
Looking at the general debate in the world of nutrition, it really, especially in America, really feels like the carnivore diet is really not helping the situation.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because people talk about me and say I'm too supportive of the food industry, and because I believe that's the industry that feeds most people, so it's the most important place we should be looking. But there's this idea that somehow carnivore diets have found this way of eating which doesn't engage with the food industry. And I think, well, where do you think meat comes from? Where it's not produced by fairies and unicorns. It is produced by a massive $1 trillion worldwide industry, which is incredibly vociferous in the way it lobbies governments, the way it influences research. And so these people who are sort of carnivore diets, or even people who eat lots of meat and lots of dairy in a high fat diet, they will sort of say, we shouldn't listen to. The food industry is dominating debate, and the reason why the science it doesn't support what we do is because it's been influenced by the food industry, not realising that a lot of the time they are sort of parroting what has been the information or misinformation that's been spread by the meat industry and by the dairy industry have a vested interest in people wanting to believe that meat and dairy are benign, both in terms of health and both in terms of environment. And again, it's sort of extremist. It's extremist supported by an industry which has enormous lobbying power in government and influencing dietary guidelines. And I'm not saying there isn't lobbying power in the rest of the food industry. I'm not saying that like soda companies haven't been sort of terrible in influencing sort of scientific research and influencing direction of research and influencing dietary guidelines in the past. But the meat industry has been just as bad. It kind of goes under the radar because it has this idea of being a meat and dairy is real food and other food is not real food, whatever that ridiculous real food term means. But people just don't understand how these things work. People don't understand that a lot of the arguments that they're presenting and a lot of the writers that they're supporting are people who are heavily influenced by the meat and dairy industry. When it comes to the environmental impact of food, although the meat and dairy industry does do lots of really good work in improving the environmental impact of what it's doing and has lots of interesting sort of work streams going on, it's also, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of people saying, "Oh, meat's fine because it pasture locks carbon into the ground" or something like that. Really fundamentally misunderstanding, environmental science. So we just need to be so careful. And one of the big problems is if I'm arguing with anyone, they'll always just go, "Well, you're a shill for the food industry," and that's for them is the end of the argument. They don't want to debate because they struggle to debate with the ideas that I have or the research that I'm sharing or the anything else about me. They just say, "Well, you're just influenced by industry, and so no one should listen to you. You should listen to this person who's talking about meat and dairy." But people just don't understand that we all have our biases. It's just I tend to sort of think that everyone has biases, and we need to have a more open debate and be open to different viewpoints.
There is an awful lot of statistics around this stuff. They can all sound plausible. What would you, or where would you direct people to try and look at good sustainability arguments and figures, so that if people are interested in, making different dietary choices based on what's happening in the world with our food system, what organisations would you point people to for credibility?
Yeah, I do a lot of stuff. I speak to a lot of people at the World Resources Institute, which has a lot of really good reports over the last couple of years, and have another big one coming out about the sustainability of food supply. The Breakthrough Research Institute has a lot of good stuff as well, and they do a lot of interesting work on both do a lot of interesting work on how we're going to modify behaviours into the future, rather than just saying this is a diet we should be eating. What are the practicalities involved in actually making that happen? Because for me, that's not enough work being done in that area. So those two are good, and obviously, there's various UN reports on the climate impact of food and the changes in population. So there is good information out there. Some of it I do. There are, the Eat Lancet stuff recently I did struggle with, although the environmental stuff is probably okay. The way it was communicated I felt was very poor, and they obviously have this link to a number of vegan activists. And I also think, in terms of environmental impact as well, I think the environmental impact of food is incredibly important, and it's becoming more and more important all the time because energy sectors and actually the energy and transport are actually making a lot of strides in reducing. And as population grows, just the agriculture sector is going to become bigger and bigger influence of climate change. And it's also, in terms of land use, it's the biggest influencer of climate change, because deforestation and stuff as demand for beef grows. But we do need to be careful because there are lots of figures that will tell us that people are campaigning for change, but often they're only campaigning for change in things that they're easy for them, and they want other people to change. For instance, if you go vegan for a year, which will reduce your climate change impact, but it'll only reduce it as much as like a one-way flight to Spain. And if you ask a lot of people who are saying you need to go vegan to save the planet, that's all very well, but ask them also where they're going on holiday, and what are they making choices that are sensible for are they wanting people to make choices that because that has a low impact on their lives? Are they willing to make choices in other areas if they're really serious about climate change? And climate change is really what they're serious about. They're probably still flying around the world. They're probably still getting on airplanes. Check what sort of car they drive. So people, we all have a life that has an impact on the environment, and we all make choices about how we reduce that impact. And so it's I think we should be very careful about judging other people for what they do.
Very interesting. Just so I can get the resources right for everyone else, you mentioned the World Resources Institute. What was the other one?
The World Resources. What's the other one I mentioned? Was the I can't remember. Can't remember off the top of my head. But I can send links through to you about a couple of some really good resources on climate change. The Breakthrough Research Institute, which is an American institute which does a lot of different work in different areas, but is doing some really good work in sort of research to help improve agriculture and improve the food sector. And there are a number of others, which I can perhaps send you a few links to, which you can share.
Awesome. No, it's just so I can list it so anyone that wants to follow up can follow up. Right, kind of last thing from me really. You've written 2 fantastic books, The Angry Chef's Guide to Spotting Bullshit in the World of Food Science and the Truth About Fat. I assume both of them are on Amazon. I've got one of the books. I've read about half of your Angry Guide Chef to Spotting Bullshit. Very good books. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, no, they've been very well received, and I think it's a good way of getting information out there. Not everyone reads the blogs, not everyone follows on Twitter, but having a book out there which is kind of a guide, and I wanted them to be something that's kind of rather than just demolishing certain particular diets, I wanted to help them give people just a guide to spotting this stuff better and interpreting evidence and looking at information and sort of doubting everything, and especially people who are particularly certain about things, especially nutrition, which is a fundamentally uncertain science. So I felt I felt it's good to have the books out there and have them a resource for people.
So everyone that is interested in today's conversation and Anthony's work in general, please go and check them out. I think one of the things I always want people to go away and consider is how critically they just look at everything. You and me today have not said that there's an absolute answer to any problem, but if we all sit down and look critically at what we believe in and what science is actually out there, rather than believing at face value. And it's the same for you and me. Like, people should not believe what we say at face value. Everyone should run our commentary through their own bullshit radar, and if something flags up, then they should go away and do that kind of research. But in the technological age where everyone's constantly consuming, maybe we're not spending enough time actually going into this information. And I always say to people, if you want to improve your health and your lifestyle and your fitness and all that kind of stuff, spend a good amount of time on the problem. And not many people are actually genuinely spending time looking at even something as simple as cooking a new recipe for the family, or working out how they can improve their nutrition, or saving costs with their shopping. Spend a good hour this Sunday and actually go through this stuff and think critically about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Science is not a list of facts. It's a way of to getting a bit closer to the truth, and it requires a constant sense of doubting and experiment, and that's how science progresses. A lot of people don't understand that. They want list of facts and definite information. Science doesn't provide that, but it does provide us with ways of getting there.
100%. Right. Thank you very much for being on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. You are the Angry Chef all over the internet if people want to find you.
Yes. I think I'm fairly easy to find. Mostly I'm on Twitter, on Facebook a little bit. I'm not on Instagram, but I'm sure I should be, and I'll try to do that. But yeah, in the blog, the Angry Chef, angry-chef.com is where you'll find a lot of my writing, and I write for various other publications as well.
Awesome. Well, please do go and check out the Angry Chef's work. I'm a fan. You should be a fan, especially if you'd like to look at the science around nutrition a lot more. If you've enjoyed this show and you think someone else could take value from the show, then please do share it. If you'd like to pass comment on something, if you'd like to ask something, jump on Twitter, have a chat, and get involved in the conversation, because really that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to generate a conversation so that more and more people are brought into the conversation, more and more people think about their health and the environment and our food network and their family's health, all that kind of stuff. So it is really important that we do talk about this stuff and we don't just sort of click stop on our podcast and kind of go about our day. We consume this information to maybe look to change and improve things in our life and the world that we live in, because if we want the world to be sustainable and we want to keep enjoying all the amazing privileges that we have in this modern world, we do maybe have to make a few changes here and there to make sure that we can sustain that in the long term. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning into the show. If you are new to this show, please do have a look at the backlog. This show is 6 years old now, so there's an awful amount of information. And all that's left for you to do after today is go and have an awesome day. Goodbye.